Welcome to The Hindu editorial discussion. This is Ryan Pinto, and I'm going to present to you The Hindu editorial discussion of November 3rd, 2020. Today's topic of The Hindu editorials are, let's see the topics first. So they are education, health, economy, and RBI. So we are going to have four topics for discussion today. That is education, health, economy, and RBI. Let's see the first topic, that is back to the school. During this time of pandemic, we have seen the schools have been closed down. It is so that the students can be saved from the risk of getting infected from coronavirus. This has led to a lot of issues. The main issue being the students have missed on a complete year, you can say, of academics. Plus, it has also led to affect the economy of the schooling system. Back to the school, but now what the government is planning to do, it is planning to reopen the schools. Is it a wise decision? So we will be seeing this in the editorial. Reopening will prevent a washout year for students, but the pandemic is not the past. So if you notice, this can be a washout year, but do you think reopening the school is feasible? Do you think the pandemic is over? That is the question which we need to ask and the government needs to think about. Decision of many students or states to reopen schools in November. So many states are planning to reopen the schools. On one side, we have people who are in support of this decision, and on the other side, we have people who do not support the decision. This area is on education, which will help you in your UPSC or government exams. They might ask you in your interviews, and when you answer, you should be having a balanced approach. Attendance at schools may remain voluntary. Since the center's guidelines, which now extend until the end of November, specify that parents can decide what their wards should do. So the government is planning to open the schools, and the center has said that it is the decision of the parents if they want to send the students to the schools or not. India's revitalized public sphere outside containment zone, with shops and restaurants open and buses and urban trains on stream, is set to widen its scope as cinemas also open at half capacity. So one of the major concern currently in this time of pandemic is opening up of the economy. Because what is happening at the moment is many people, though not dying of the infection, are now dying of poverty, hunger, and other issues. Mental problems are also another issue. Now, to overcome all this, the government has to take some decision. And that is why such decisions are needed. The government is now opening up containment zones, shops, restaurants, buses, trains, and even planning to open cinemas. The question will be, why not schools then? Risk of exposing more people to the coronavirus. One of the main reasons why schools have been closed. The belief that India has crossed its peak infection and reduced its transmission rate could well prompt citizens to become lax about safe behavior. So there is a risk that people might get infected more and laxity might increase. Children who are believed to be less affected by infection could bring the virus home to vulnerable individuals. A phenomena experienced after reopening schools in Israel. What happened in Israel? Many students who went to school brought the virus back home. And the most dangerous situation is for the vulnerable. And when we say vulnerable, it is senior citizens and people having diseases. What happened in Europe? In Europe, where lockdowns have been reimposed due to fresh VAO cases, children represented less than 5% of all infections in 27 European countries. So, what did Europe do? Teachers' unions in Britain are calling for limited classes to help disadvantaged children and those with parental commitments. So, in Britain, they are partially opening. Public schools in many United States remain closed while some private institutions have reopened. France is asking even small children to wear masks along with teachers. So these are the steps taken by the other countries. We need to learn from these steps, from their experiences. A reopening will revive the economy, but it need not impose a deadly price in the form of avoidable and invisible deaths among elderly and the vulnerable. As I have told you, children are less susceptible, but the most you can say vulnerable people are the elderly and the people who have diseases. So we need to think about them and take the decisions. Now the second editorial talks about evolution of education. So today's editorials mostly focuses on education and in connection with COVID-19. Second one talks about evolution of education. Let's see evolution of education. Education, the nation and the states. This editorial is written by Krishna Kumar, who is a former director of NCRT, that is National Council of Educational Research and Training. Towards the end of a recent webinar, so the writer says, towards the end of the recent webinar on National Education Policy 2020, a retired civil servant asked a question. Referring to center-state relations and roles in education, he asked whether the new policy gives center a predatory role. So we have recently brought out the National Education Policy, and Krishna Kumar, who was the former director, he says a retired civil servant asked what the center wants to do in this National Education Policy, because even the 1986 policy didn't fully acknowledge the variety prevailing in provincial practices. What you have to remember is center is now, according to the writer, trying to control the whole education by itself in a centralized manner, which is not good for the education, number one. Secondly, not good for the diversity also. Every state, every region has its own method of learning, has its own priority areas for learning, has its own way of learning. So you can't have one size fits all in case of India. So 1986 you have the earlier education policy. So you must remember this fact. 1986 we have the earlier education policy and now the new education policy. For education to fulfill its social role, it must respond to the specific environment, milieu in which the young are growing up. States have their own social worlds to deal with, and they often prefer to carry on with the ways they became familiar with in colonial days. So, as I just told you, the people who are living in the states are more familiar with the environment of the state. So if you give education in that environment, it is going to become better. It will help the student to grow. A prime example in the continuation of the intermediate or junior colleges in several states more than half a century after Kothari Commission gave its much acclaimed report. So many people continued with the junior colleges even when Kothari Commission had said to scrap off this practice of junior college. It means the states behave or they take decision according to certain environment. Evolution in the provinces. 100 years ago, Central Advisory Board of Education was being created. So you must remember, 100 years ago, we had Central Advisory Board of Education. So remember these points. 1986, I had told you there was the education policy which had come to coordinate regional responses to common issues. The constitution in its original draft treated states as appropriate sphere for dealing with education. But unlike some other federal countries, India chose to have Ministry of Education at the center. The constitution said that states should be given more power, but we have Ministry of Education. It means center is controlling. Soon after independence, a more substantial sphere of center's activity in education emerged in the shape of advanced institutions in professional fields and schools, specifically meant for children of civil servants, transferable across India. So we are seeing the evolution. First, we saw a central advisory board of education was created. Then we saw after independence, constitution was made, and in the constitution, states were given more power. Yes, even the center was there, but centralization did happen. After independence, again we see various institutions being opened up so that civil servants can send their students, or because the civil servants are transferred from one place to another, right? So for to cater them, institutions were opened. In 1986, the national policy was drafted under a youthful leader. It was Rajiv Gandhi. It emphasized national concerns and perspective without referring to provincial states' practices that indicated strong divergence. So you have just remember these points. So you have Central Advisory Board, you have Ministry of Education, we have various schools for civil servants, and 1986 National Education Policy. A burgeoning private sector had begun to push for both public policy and popular perceptions of education, and now we have more of private sector. There's always a debate: is so should education be in the hands of private sector or should it be in the hands of public sector? Throughout the 1990s, those in charge of education remained hesitant to explain publicly how exactly liberalization would apply to this traditionally public responsibility. After 1990s, we know LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. There was a question how the education will be handled. So what you have to remember till now, what did we see? In the evolution, Central Advisory Board, the Constitution, states were given power, but Ministry of Education was made. Then we have institutes open for civil servants. 1986, we have education policy, private sector becoming famous, and then 1990s. So this is how we see the evolution. Currently, now what has happened? There is a three-tier system. There is a central system. There is a central system, remember. There is a system where private sector plays a role. And secondly, there is where a central system is there and it is catering only to the rich and only to the higher classes. So remember, central system where it is catering to the elites. The central system also includes professional institutes and universities. There are some which is run by the states also. The third system is purely private. So just remember these three systems which are currently going on. An explicit attempt was made under the RTE, Right to Education, to bridge the first two systems. That is the central system and central system which is somewhat run by the states also. So to bridge these two, a lot of work has been done in RTE. RTE, Right to Education, passed in 2010, providing a set of standards for elementary education and a call to the private schools to provide for social justice via quota route. So in RTE, it is written that the private schools will be giving quota to the poor. So this has been seen for the private sector. Coordination among the three systems has proved unmanageable. Inequalities have become sharper. With the rise in overall prosperity, education must mediate between different social strata divided by caste and economic status. So we saw the evolution. We saw currently system what is happening. That's the center and the states and private. But the problem in education is inequality. Many students do not get good quality education. The recent attempt by Tamil Nadu, they have made a very nice. So this is current affairs. You should remember what they have done is in NEET there is a quota for the students who are from the uh, public, or you can say government schools. Whoever studied in the government schools, they will have a quota in the NEET once they pass. So all this is a good step so that equality is brought in. The architect of many of national level institutions, late JP Nayak, used to say that we must ask what kind of human being and society want before we draft a policy in education. So this quote is very important, that it will help you in your answers when you write something on education, and it is by JP Nayak. Okay, so just remember this. Functional uniformity is unlikely to offer any real solution. That is what the new policy seems to favor. In higher education, it proposes nationally codified and administered measures to oversee institutional transformation. So there is need for uniformity. There is need for equality. More than uniformity, there is need for equality. Equality does not mean that you take all the institutions and work or administer it in the same manner. That is what the center is trying to do. So, functional uniformity is unlikely to offer any real solution. Sufficient indication has existed for many years now that economic policy favors greater private enterprise in higher education. How to reconcile this push with the necessity of equitable public education is a nagging question. So, economic policy always is beneficial for the private enterprises. How can we get equality? How can we think about the people? That is a question. So the debate on should it be public sector run institutions or private sector, you should remember that. The many different ways in which states have maintained their colleges and universities cannot all be regarded as a sign of dysfunctional or failing system. If failure is a criterion for the choice of remedy, so the states have not run the institutions in a bad manner. You must have seen so many Delhi University, Mumbai University, and so many other universities run by the state which have done fairly well. Failure again, what the writer is trying to say is failure again needs to, the criteria depends on situation to situation, and it is very subjective. But this does not mean that you stop the state run institutions and make everything centralized. The writer says the government through the national education policy is trying to centralize all of the things. RTE and center state relation, it is useful to recall that RTE was drafted, right to education was drafted with prolonged involvement with the states, not mere consultation. So now we are talking about the RT. So initially we saw the evolution, then we saw what our motive should be, then we saw uh, public versus the private, and center state relation. So states were being asked when RT was made. So states consensus are important. We are a federal system. A vital role was played by the highest judiciary in pushing the polity towards recognizing children's rights. Our judiciary played a major role. This was a historic social turn towards greater equality between sharply unequal strata. It might not have accomplished if the center had not. Yes, center's role was there, but judiciary was the one who pushed for equality. Further progress of this role called for continued financial support for the implementation of RT. Now we don't need to stop, we need to continue and work for better education, reaching all, and making, seeing to it that more people are brought out from the clutches of poverty. For that, financial support is needed, policy guidance is needed, and see to it that regional disparities diminish. So the first editorial we saw was back to school. Second editorial focusing more on uh, the states, the quality of education, and private, public, and center state. The third one, again, speaking about education, is the nutrition fallout of school closures, focusing on the midday meal scheme. Schools are being closed and students not getting food. So, school or education linked with uh, food, health, nutrition. So the nutrition fallout is evident. You can see many schools being closed, because of which students are not getting food, because midday meal scheme was a, you can say, a policy where students were even given food, and students used to go to the school for the sake of food. And as you say, as it is thought of, like it was, we saw it as we could take two, or we could solve two problems using one solution: health, nutrition, as well as education. The nutrition fallout of school closures, the largest school feeding program in the world. So 116 million students are, or children are fed using this midday meal scheme. And as I have told you, after the COVID 19, it has become uh, a sad situation or a casualty. The report of the, so how do we know it is a big casualty? The report of the Food Security and Nutrition in 2020, released by a Food and Agriculture Organization in partnership with other UN organization, painted a worrying picture. So this report given by this organization is giving a worrying picture. The recent global hunger index, so these are the numbers that all of you need to remember. So first of all, we saw the report, which is by Food and State of the Food Security and Nutrition by Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. And remember, there is numbers. Global Hunger Index report 2020 ranks India 94 out of 107, and the category serious, behind our neighbors Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal. The index is a combination of indicators of undernutrition of population and wasting, stunting, and mortality in children. We are going to see later what is wasting and stunting. For now, you have to remember, our number in global hunger index is 94. We are more behind than Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. A report by International Labour Organization and UNICEF on COVID-19 and child labor cautions that unless school services and social services are equally universally strengthened, there is a risk that some children may not even return to school when they reopen. So the labor organization and UNICEF is saying we need to, outside the school, we need to give them some food and some hand holding so that they return to school when it opens up. A midday meal in India should provide. So let's see in a midday meal what happens. So we saw some numbers. How many people are being fed by the midday meal scheme? What is the status of India? We are 94, and what is happening in the pandemic? A midday meal in India should provide 450 calories of energy, minimum 12 grams of protein, and some micronutrients like iron, folic acid, vitamin A, etc. So just remember these numbers: 450 kilocalories of energy, 12 grams of protein, and these numbers you should remember. That many children reach school on an empty stomach, making the school's midday meal a major source of nutrition for children, particularly for the vulnerable communities. Midday meal scheme was just seen as a method of supplementing the food, but what is happening is students go to the school without food. Midday meal scheme just gives one third of the nutrition. So just imagine how many children are there, how much of work the government needs to do so that we can give food, the basic necessity, to our children in India. In orders in March and April 2020, in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic and closure of schools, the government of India announced that usual hot cooked midday meal or equivalent should be given. So, so government of India said usual hot cooked midday meal or an equivalent food security should be provided to the students even during vacation. According to FCI Food Grain Bulletin, the offtake of food grains from FCI to midday meal scheme has reduced. But what is the situation? So COVID-19, what is the situation? Government said you should give midday meals, but are we able to give the meals? The FCI has said the grains have reduced. The grains reaching the midday meal scheme has reduced. The other worrying angle is the fact that there are reports of children engaging in labor to supplement family income. Children have started joining labor. Will they return back? That's a question. In July this year, Madras High Court also took cognizance and asked the Tamil Nadu government to respond on the subject. The nutritional needs of children were being fulfilled. Serving hot meals at the children's homes or even at the center may have challenges. So Madras High Court also questioned. So we need to see the innovative strategy. So initially I told you what is the benefit of the midday meal scheme. Then I told you what is the current situation during pandemic. Now for the innovative strategies, what can we do so that we can give the children food? Local smallholder farmers involvement in school feeding is suggested by experts. This is a very good suggestion. Means small farmers can be said or employed to give money, not money, sorry, food to the children. So what happens is farmers' livelihood also is taken care of and the children get food. He suggests such as Basanta Kumar Kar, so a person, an expert who has given this suggestion. He suggests a livelihood model that links local smallholder farmers with the midday meal scheme for the supply of cereals, vegetables, eggs, while meeting protein and hidden hunger needs, which could diversify production and farming system, transform rural livelihoods and local economy. This will also help. So the expert says this will also help us diversify our food, nutrition and fulfill the Atmanirbhar Poshan agenda. The COVID-19 crisis has also brought home the need for decentralized models and local supply chains. There are new initiatives like school nutrition, kitchen garden under the midday meal scheme to provide fresh vegetables. Hot meals can be provided to eligible children. Thirdly, locally produced vegetables and fruits may be added to midday meal schemes, also providing an income to local farmers. So, more of the such solutions are more decentralized. With continuing uncertainty regarding the opening of the schools, innovation is similarly required to ensure that not just food but nutrition is delivered regularly to children. So this is how you have to understand. We saw the situation, we saw how midday meal scheme helps, we saw the current situation during pandemic and what are the innovative strategies. These can be in your exam, it can be asked in social issues or in governance. Now end of the tunnel. Let's see what is the situation in our country today, in our economy today. So the welcome pickup in GST may not yet signal a sustainable economic recovery. So what has happened is in the month of October, government has got good amount of GST. Over 1.5 lakh crore has been collected from the GST in October, the highest monthly revenue from the indirect tax since February 2020. October's revenue pertained to economic activity that occurred in September, a month in which significant improvements were recorded, including exports and purchasing managers index for manufacturing. So a lot of manufacturing was done, a lot of exports was done in September. That is why the October numbers were good. When public and In this part, what happened is public transport restrictions were lifted, several sectors were allowed to operate with fewer curbs, which helped. These are the positive points that happened. 23.9% negative for the economy in the first quarter. In our April to June quarter, we had minus 23.9% growth, which hit our economy. It partly represent, so this was a bad news. The good news about the rise in GST is because one of the reason is because of pent up demand, since since the people were all locked down, when they had to buy a lot of things when the economy opened. So so the pent up demand increased over the month of lockdown, finding expression, and partly India's fabled festive season effect. So the reason in September we had so much of buying is because of a festive season. Secondly, so many months of people inside the house, and when they went out, they tried to purchase goods. Talking about the economy is perhaps a necessary policy device at times, but equally critical is a realistic assessment of ground reality. So when we are seeing the economy growing up, it is a good policy, but we also need to be realistic. We should have a realistic assessment of ground reality so that we are prepared better. So it's not to discourage the government or criticize the government that we are discussing. It's a good thing, but we can't take it and praise it always. We also have to assess the situation critically. The government has not ruled out more stimulus measures in the coming months, and we can't be complacent. The government needs to do more so that the GST increases and the economy goes higher. Reinforcing RBI's accountability. So, this is the last editorial that we have for today about RBI's accountability. RBI, when we talk about Reserve Bank of India, it is the central bank, it is the most important bank that we have, which controls the money flow in the market, in turn controlling the inflation, and it is responsible for it. In each of the last 3 quarters, so about the RBI, in each of the last 3 quarters, average inflation has not only exceeded but has persisted above the tolerance level. The inflation notified in August 2016 is 4%, 2% plus, 2% minus. So you can't go below 2%, you can't go above 4%, above 6%. That is what government has given target to the RBI. In such an event, RBI is required to send a report, but recently we have seen they are not able to keep the target, stating the reasons for the failure to achieve the inflation target. So if they are not able to, then the RBI has to send a report. They are answerable to the government. But currently, RBI has not been taken to task. The remedial action it proposes to initiate and an estimate of the time period within which it expects to achieve the inflation target. So the government asks the RBI, when will it all be over, and when will the economy come back on track? But currently the RBI is not answering, and the government has not questioned. The RBI uses you can say, a reason of data limitation. The minutes of Monetary Policy Committee meeting after its August policy review suggest that RBI's defense for the breach of 4% inflation target and 6% upper tolerance limit was handicap of data. They are saying we didn't have the data. The normal data collection exercise of National Statistics Office was disrupted during the lockdown. And the RBI has taken an accommodative range. So they are now focusing on the range rather than the numbers. The data for the last quarters, that is 5.8%, 6.7%, 6.6%, appears continuous. The average inflation of the April-June quarter at 6.6%. So inflation is 6.6%. The target given was 6%. It looks reasonable despite the computation, probably because of RBI's October monetary policy report notes. Once the COVID 19 related restrictions were lifted and non essential activities partially restored, data collection resumed. After the restrictions were over in June, slowly the data started being taken again, and RBI is now focusing on the accommodative range rather than telling 6% plus. They are taking about the range. The range around inflation target that ministry provided to the RBI is for accommodating constraints and challenges like data limitation. The press statement that finance ministry had issued at the time of setting the target makes this quite clear. So the RBI is hiding behind the accommodative range. Transparency is very important for governance. It is hard to imagine what could be gained by letting the RBI sidestep the institutional mechanism provided under the RBI Act. Why should the RBI not made to explain what it plans to do to control inflation? The central bank should be allowed to state expressly what support by way of government policy it needs to meet the inflation target. It should answer. Transparency can enable more informed decision making within the government, greater public scrutiny of the RBS performance, and improved inflation targeting regime. To slack off on it would compromise with credibility, transparency, and predictability of monetary policy. So, transparency is very important, and to not ask questions will compromise with RBI's credibility, transparency, and predictability of monetary policy. So, that's all for today. We covered four discussions or four editorials. Remember, the source of all knowledge is asking questions. So, if you ask questions, it's going to be a source of all knowledge. Thank you.